Imagine looking down at your city from above, watching a glowing heat map trace thousands of pedestrian paths. Every street, hallway, and courtyard forms an invisible geometry that dictates exactly where you walk, who you meet, and how you feel. In the 20th century, the Soviet Union launched one of the largest architectural experiments in history, attempting to weaponize urban geometry to rewrite human psychology. To understand what they were trying to fix, look at what they inherited. The pre-1917 Russian Empire was an urban landscape defined by severe inequality. Grand, highly regulated spaces like St. Petersburg's Palace Square served as the opulent facade for an autocratic state, masking massive, unregulated slums. Following the revolution, the new Bolshevik government faced a severe crisis. A rapidly expanding working class was flooding into the cities in desperate need of shelter, and the state had a strict ideological mandate to physically erase the capitalist city structure. The early avant-garde architects proposed a massive intervention. They elevated building design to a behavioral science, inventing structures called social condensers. These were complex residential machines calibrated to dismantle individual domesticity and force a collective way of living. The state was attempting to write a mathematical formula for an entirely new society, using concrete as the variables. But this approach relied on a dangerous assumption, that human beings would react exactly like a predictable blueprint. The first major test of this theory was the Narkomfin building, designed in the late 1920s by architect Moisey Ginsburg. This 3D cutaway shows the internal layout. Notice the omission. Ginsburg completely eliminated private kitchens from these apartments, forcing residents to use communal dining rooms in an adjoining block. By centralizing domestic labor, the architecture tried to free women from isolated household roles. The residents rejected the theory almost immediately. They fiercely guarded their privacy, illegally erecting partitions inside their spacious units and smuggling in rudimentary private stoves to avoid the collective dining halls. For the vast majority of citizens, the reality was much harsher. Millions were forced into the Kommunalka, or communal apartment. The state subdivided massive pre-revolutionary homes, allocating a single room to an entire family. Dozens of individuals had to share a single cramped kitchen and bathroom. The government actively weaponized this lack of privacy. Paid informants were housed directly within these apartments. With paper-thin walls and highly trafficked hallways, neighbors were heavily incentivized to listen closely and denounce one another to the KGB. Yet, this intense physical proximity also forged profound, lifelong bonds. In environments completely devoid of physical boundaries, residents relied on deep-rooted peasant traditions of mutual aid, sharing childcare and resources. To survive the extreme conditions of the architecture, they built an intricate protective community. Following the death of Joseph Stalin, Nikita Khrushchev inherited a catastrophic housing crisis. His solution stripped architecture of its status as high art and repositioned it entirely as a branch of heavy industrial manufacturing. This era birthed the large panel system and the ubiquitous Khrushchyovka. Massive factories turned out standardized concrete slabs, which were transported to the periphery of cities and assembled on site like machinery. Every ounce of aesthetic comfort was sacrificed to keep costs low and output high. Between 1955 and 1959 alone, housing construction more than doubled. The state aggressively copied and pasted identical microdistricts from the Arctic to the Caucasus, enforcing absolute spatial and visual equality across the empire. But this utilitarian push triggered a massive, entirely unintended social shift. By moving citizens out of the communal apartments and giving them tiny private boxes, the state accidentally dismantled its own physical surveillance network. Insulated from the watchful eyes of KGB informants, the microscopic private kitchen became a safe haven. A vibrant underground culture flourished within these cramped concrete walls, serving as the incubator for intense political debate, forbidden poetry, and the exchange of illicit cassette tapes. On the outside of the buildings, citizens found a highly visible way to rebel against the standardization. To gain desperate extra living space in freezing climates, millions began illegally enclosing their open balconies. Using mismatched glass panes, salvaged wood, and sheet metal, they practiced zasteklirny. The state's drive for total utilitarian uniformity provided the exact blank canvas its citizens needed to aggressively reassert their individuality and reclaim the built environment. Today, researchers are looking back at this massive spatial footprint without the lens of Cold War politics. In 2026, using high-resolution geographic information systems, large-scale data modeling, and traffic microsimulation, we can objectively measure how these historical environments function. Recent GIS analysis reveals a surprising success. The rigid geometry of the Soviet microdistrict created a highly sustainable urban grid. By clustering schools, polyclinics, and groceries to enforce an 8-minute principle, this layout still generates exceptional transit ridership and reduced travel times today. Modern urban planners are currently spending billions trying to replicate this exact formula. The dense, car-free, highly localized infrastructure of the Soviet bloc accidentally laid the groundwork for today's highly popularized 15-minute city. But behavioral economics also exposes the severe psychological toll of the Soviet method. The absolute, dogmatic standardization of these identical grids created an environment entirely devoid of visual hierarchy or landmarks. This aggressive homogenization led to profound spatial alienation and chronic disorientation. Human neurobiology requires a distinct sense of place identity and the security of physical privacy. When architecture attempts to forcibly manufacture a unified collective through sheer spatial proximity alone, it generates intense psychological stress rather than social harmony. Street layouts and floor plans act as catalysts, quietly shaping daily choices and human interactions long after the architects have left. Urban geometry can successfully dictate movement and efficiency, but the messy, resilient nature of human psychology will always have the final word in how a city actually lives.